This week, Mulele and I talk about Dan Clowes' graphic novel Wilson, with a bit of a detour into the Ghost in the Shell movie. Then Kumar and Emmet review the recent movie adaptation of Wilson. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon, and make that your bookmark for future purchases. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week. We really appreciate your support.
This is Tim.
And Mulele.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim with Mulele in Tokyo, in Koenji, in a coffee shop. So, trying not to be too loud in here. Because as soon as we get ready to record, then a bunch of other people walk in. Just Golden Week finishing up here.
Was it golden for you?
It was kind of bronze, I think.
All right. I'm kind of in the Silver Age area.
Yeah. So golden, for people who don't know, Golden Week is theoretically a week-long holiday, except it's never quite a week.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird structure to it. But anyway, some days off that are just finishing up here. It's Sunday, so tomorrow is a regular weekday. And so we're intending for at least part of this episode to talk about Wilson by Dan Clowes. Seems like Dan Clowes has been a big topic on the podcast lately. This one came out back in 2010, and I bought the book in 2013, and it had been sitting on my shelf for a while. And I mentioned to Mulele, maybe we could do a podcast about it. I guess you had a copy sitting around for a while also?
Actually, no. It's Noriko's copy. Noriko is my translator, and I do some translation work with her. And in fact, she bought the copy of Wilson because the movie is coming out in Japan, and she's the subtitler for the movie. So I was working on the translation of Wilson with her. And seeing the movie that way was not the smoothest of experiences, but it was a really intriguing story, and I really liked the character of Wilson. She bought the book so she could do the translation a little bit better. And so I got her a copy of the book because I like Daniel Clowes' work. And just good comics. I like good comics, and so I borrowed it and then left it on my shelf for a month or two.
Okay, so a lot shorter time than I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I bought it at the time that I was about to give up my job at the base and give up my EPO box. I just ordered a bunch of stuff.
Okay.
And I think I've gradually kind of worked my way through that stuff, but this was one that I hadn't gotten to yet. Now, I'm interested. I have not seen the movie. It's not out yet in Japan. I actually considered going to see it during Golden Week, but it's not available to see yet. And it's not on streaming from America yet either, so there was basically no way for me to see it this past week. But I'm kind of curious because for the comic we'll discuss, the art style is an important part of it because, so for people who haven't seen it, even though it's been out for 7 years, each page is set up kind of like reading a book full of Sunday comics, but each one is in a different art style, or it kind of, maybe goes back to the same art style later, but you go from page to page, you're getting a different art style every page. But did they have some way of replicating that feeling for the movie?
Well, there's a lot of practical effects, but also some CGI involved. But no, I'm just kidding. No, they played it straight. They, in fact, completely ignored that whole thing. But a little bit of point here. Why did they change the art style? Why did he change the art style every couple of pages? I didn't quite get that.
Okay, well, I read some reviews, and different reviewers had different thoughts about that. Let's see. So, now some of the reviews that I read, I mean, it seems like you really got to read a review by somebody who knows comics. Mm-hmm. New York Times reviews of graphic novels are generally, they kind of miss the point sometimes. Certainly with Asterios Polyp, that was especially true, because Asterios Polyp, the story was immaterial. Mm-hmm. It was about other things, and so if you read a review that starts out with the story of Asterios Polyp, stop reading, because they've missed the point. But yeah, so the Hooded Utilitarians review by, if I can pronounce his name correctly, Ng Swat Tong, he mentions this. Much has been made of the varying styles Clowes employs throughout Wilson. Sean T. Collins doesn't feel that the kaleidoscopic array of styles in which Daniel Clowes drew Wilson says much of anything, this itself being the gag. Jog, J-O-G, proposes that it is a simulacrum in that the way us readers see him is broken up page by page so that he's as if spotted by a somewhat different, biased, or interested observer, even in scenes where no observers are actually present. Ken Paril advises his readers that the styles of Wilson represent a refusal to participate in the lie of certainty and consistency. In place of such assurance, Wilson substitutes a series of beautifully executed styles that give us an honest and therefore an incomplete portrait of a compelling character. Tom Spurgeon believes that the author intends it as a commentary on just how difficult it is to know a character, or more generally to get at truth through art. And then at the end of the review, he links to some interviews with Clowes and pulls a quote out of each one. Okay, an interview with DCist. When I actually sat down to write it, I tried to devise a master style that would work for the entire book, and I kept veering between doing really cartoony styles and then going to a much more realistic style and trying out all these different methods. And as I was doing that, I realized that that was the only way to do the entire book. There was no one style that made sense for this book. It would have to be this kind of mosaic approach where you're seeing kind of different facets of this guy on different days and kind of separating each strip into its own different universe that's not necessarily related to the others in sequence. So that's his own explanation.
It's kind of a non-explanation, though.
Well, I think I read a New York Times review, too, where it was saying that that writer, I don't have that in front of me or up on my phone, but he was thinking that the art styles told us something about how Wilson was feeling at that point, or how close to reality he was in his mind at that point. But I don't think that quite works, because on page 27, after his dad dies, when he's walking through the old neighborhood, it's a pretty cartoony style, but it's really dark ending of that strip where he's on that pitcher's mound in the park saying, "Oh, daddy, daddy, daddy." So I don't know that the art style necessarily tells us.
Well, but I mean, if you take it that way, almost every last panel in this comic is dark on every page.
Right, yeah, in different ways. Sometimes, at the beginning, it's where he's seeming to be nice to somebody, and then in the last panel, cussing them out.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's like telling us something that happened 10 pages ago that he didn't reveal to us at the time, like about the daughter, why they're running around with the daughter.
Yeah.
Or, yeah, I mean, it's some kind of a twist usually. But, I mean, it's set up like a punchline, except it's usually not funny.
Yeah.
Although, I guess it kind of depends on the reader, because I was looking at Goodreads, and some people there were saying that it was a hilarious book. And I was like, really? I mean, there are a few points that I thought were funny, but I wouldn't sell it as a hilarious book.
Well, I understand that this started when Daniel Clowes' father was dying. He was doodling by his bedside. And this is the result of that. So there seems to be a lot of stuff that's kind of poignant, I guess, but ultimately dark. And I don't know, I think some of it is actually funny, but most of it is just kind of human. And I do appreciate that about this book. Differing art styles were interesting. I don't know that they were necessary. I don't know that I'd be more or less entertained if they were all one style or the other. But yeah, it's just interesting. I don't think it's that involved.
Yeah, I mean, from what I got from that quote of Clowes was just that he felt like he needed to do different art styles to get across different things on different pages. And he just sort of took that to an extreme. Yeah, I mean, I guess... I mean, I think I'd add something, but I don't think it would be a terribly different book if it didn't have that. Depends on, if he had settled on one art style, I guess it would depend on what art style he settled on. But
well, I don't know for sure what his thinking was with the art style changes, but for myself, when I'm working through a project, there's a lot of false starts and various techniques I'm trying that eventually gel, and that's when the real comic actually starts. I may have to go back and work on the front end a little bit to kind of smooth it out, but once it gels into a style, whatever that style is. But it doesn't have to. In fact, it never wavers in style once the project has its own momentum. So in doing this project, making that choice to vary the style, it kind of becomes a system, but not necessarily for any kind of reason that he puts on every page. Sometimes the style isn't consistent with the content, or
yeah, I mean, I'd be going for contrast there sometimes with a cartoony style and a serious story.
Possibly, but it's not always that. Sometimes there's no contrast to be had there. And so that's why I'm saying, is it actually necessary to the story to have it like this, or is it just a part of the system that he designed for the story and he stuck with it no matter what happened? And I think the latter is more true. Yeah.
Now, when looking at reviews, I've read some of his other stuff, although it hasn't been terribly recently. I read a long time ago, I think it was when you were in Los Angeles, like 11 years ago, and Brandon and I were doing the podcast, and we reviewed Ghost World. I'm pretty sure you were gone by that time.
Okay.
And then, now, Kumar and Dana have recently, like within the past couple of years, they did like a Velvet Fist Cast in Iron, but I also did it in a different way, kind of. I did a couple of episodes years ago with a guy in Los Angeles who does voiceovers. And we were trying to find comics that had kind of an audio component. And like a Velvet Fist Cast in Iron, someone did like a soundtrack album for that comic. And so we were talking really about the soundtrack album, but we read the comic so that we would know what it was supposed to match up with. So I read that. And that's been maybe 5 years ago. But to my recollection, that's pretty much the extent of my Clowes reading. But looking at these reviews, I noticed that the people who were kind of more comics people felt like it was one of his weaker books. And I'm not sure if I have an opinion on that because I would need to read more of his stuff. But I don't know, what do you think?
I haven't read that much of his stuff either. Black Hole is him, right?
No, it's Charles Burns.
Never mind then. I read that years ago. Don't remember anything about it, sorry. It left no impression. But I think I've read maybe one other book by Daniel Clowes, but I can't remember which one it was. Or maybe I've just seen him in passing, seen his work in passing, and have become quite familiar with him as a person. As far as recognizing him when I see him on the internet in an interview or something. But I think for myself, I'm just going to say that I'm not familiar with his work beyond Wilson at this point, because I don't remember what I read. Don't even remember how I might have felt about it. So I guess it doesn't really count. But this work by itself, I quite liked it. I don't think it's funny in the sense of laugh out loud stuff. It's a drama, and in my mind, the movie plays kind of a large part because a lot of the movie does kind of make its own connective tissue, whereas in this book, you're kind of left to understand what happens. Like when he's out with his daughter, and the three of them are kind of talking about, or I should say Wilson is talking about how the three of them being together like a family is great. And then the next page, he's in jail. And it's like, there's a leap there. And you have to kind of construct what exactly happened to get him into that spot. And so that kind of stuff was, in fact, much more detailed in the movie.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty short book. There are only 71 pages of comic in this book, so they probably had to pad it out a little bit to make a movie, I would think. I think they got into his routines a little bit more, but some of the passages are lifted straight from the book into the movie. Like when his dog dies, he eulogizes the dog, and that's almost verbatim. But I think Woody Harrelson played the character pretty well, or matched the character pretty well. And some of his observations are pretty interesting, if not funny. I would say that the movie is actually funnier than the book. The book is kind of dark and a little bit depressing. I understand Clowes did the script for the movie.
Oh, did he?
I believe I looked at another interview with him on Comics Journal that had been done more recently, and I believe it said that he had written the script himself.
Okay, because my thing about it was that the film itself was different from the comic enough that it's recognizable as a film rather than a comic that's been thrown onto a movie screen, which tells me that the filmmaker understood that he was making something that was different than the comic.
Yeah, he's credited with both graphic novel and screenplay.
So the screenplay works as a film, and the comic works as a comic, but they are different mediums, and the creator approached it as something different. So the fact that he wrote that means that he is a much, much, much better writer than a lot of people doing this kind of adaptation. Case in point, Ghost in the Shell.
Have you seen it?
I have seen it.
Oh dear, how was it?
Oh my fucking god!
I heard that it was basically a completely different story.
Well, it's a little bit of what the original was, although the original, I have to say, I read the comic a long time ago. I think you and I and Kumar did a podcast on it.
Yeah, that was quite a while ago.
Yeah, I remember a little bit of that, just being kind of quite amazed at how detailed and how far-reaching his ideas were into our future reality. Internet before there was internet, email before there's email, and all of that stuff. But it takes the elements from the comic and a lot of elements from the anime. In fact, there's a lot of verbatim shots in the anime. But what I came to understand was that the director or producer or writer, whoever is at fault for this, one of the three of them, probably the director, loved the anime so much that he was making a live-action version of that. And it's kind of like masturbating. He loved the original creation so much he added nothing to it. It didn't deconstruct it. Didn't do anything to find the heart of it or what it was trying to say. He was just following it viscerally, and it's hollow. It barely functions as a film in its own right, and the workaround for the whitewashing was so stupid and nonsensical.
What was it, like a Japanese person in a white person's body?
Well, they cast a white actress, and then there was so much backlash on it, and then like when the casting was announced, there was backlash, and then there was further backlash when we saw pictures of the first picture, and then there was even more backlash when we saw a picture where they adjusted her eyes digitally to be Japanese, and it's like, fuck, that's really fucking bad. It was really, really awful. And then they have this tacked on construction of she was a Japanese woman who was placed in this, her brain was alive, but her body was dead. So when they put in the new body, hey, it's a robot. We just happen to make him white instead of, because white is right. But the one-of-a-kind multi-billion-dollar project that they were making, they decided to use a white model for the robot and a Japanese person's brain. Because that's the way you do in science. And hey, it's just, that's just the way it happened. The explanation is so weak that it is in fact just an excuse, or rather a way to say, hey, we're not whitewashing, it's a story element. But it's not. It was whitewashing, and they tried to save it. It didn't work, and I'm not buying that. The story itself, it removes so much from the originals, but adds that one element that was not in the originals, not in the original script, and not in the original anime or the original manga. And so it's obviously put there for that purpose. And it's insulting at best. I was talking to someone else who said, I really want to like it because it's the action and the money behind the action is kind of right for what it should be. Like when she floats down the building and busts through the glass and shoots everybody while walking on the wall. That scene was done correctly. And I said, yeah, it's straight out of the comic or the movie, the anime, but it's not interesting because I've seen it already.
Yeah,
I've seen it in the anime, and I remember something like that in the book. So why would I need to see this one?
Yeah, just because it's kind of, it's not an anime, it's real life, and somehow that's going to make it more interesting. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been so much of that lately. I'm like, I've already seen this. Do I need to see it again?
Well, see, here's the thing, though. This whitewashing thing is going to continue for a while, and they're going to do another one. They're going to do many more. Death Note was one that is now going through that. They made
I saw something about
Netflix made their version of Death Note, and they... is it a whitewash if they use black actors?
Anyway, they made them native English speaker.
Yeah, and the director / producers excuse for this is like, hey, there are no Asian people that can speak well enough. And
Yeah,
actually,
I saw that.
apparently the spokesman for this, or maybe it was the producer, is the guy who played, what's his name on Heroes? The Japanese guy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I was thinking, fuck, he's going to make that statement that there are no Asian actors who can speak English well enough. That's a really fucked up thing to say, especially as an Asian actor.
Yeah.
So
There are lots of Japanese Americans and Chinese Americans that speak perfect English they could hire.
yeah, and I mean, that's kind of a dick thing to say, but it kind of ensures that, well, the whitewashing continues. But anyway, aside from all of that, focusing on just Wilson, bringing it back to our original
On
topic
what now?
today,
Oh, yeah.
the writer and the director of the movie knew that it was something different from the comic and treated it as such, and that was nice. I liked the film very much, and I liked the comic very much, but they are separate. You can enjoy both of them. They do kind of tell the same story. They do tell the same story, but in different ways. And so,
Okay.
yeah. Also, I like the little end blurb on the I think it's in the inside.
Oh, his little bio thing?
Yeah.
Where he says, I need to fill up this space with text. So.
Yeah, I thought that was very cute.
Oh, I guess the other thing to say about this, I mean, I thought it was pretty good. I mean, I guess some of the complaints that I saw, particularly in the comments on that Hooded Utilitarian article, were saying it sounded like something that had already been done other places, which may be true. It depends on what you've already read or seen. But I think it was that article, well, other places maybe also caught this, but how important kind of water is as a symbol in this. Starting with at the beginning, early on, where he's talking about looking out at the ocean with his parents when he was a kid, and kind of thinking about why they might have done that. Like, I guess maybe they were trying to connect with something bigger, something vast and everlasting, or whatever, and then he just gives up on it. And then, well, I think that review mentioned, there are people talking over drinks, there are tears, there's various bodies of water. Then, just before he ends up going to prison, there's a scene where they're talking in front of an empty swimming pool. So the water is absent there. But then, while he's in prison, he's watching this icicle melt. And then in the sixth and final panel, he says, still nothing. So he's still apparently contemplating what was interesting for his parents about looking at the ocean. And then on the last page, he's apparently older, and he's sitting in a chair looking out the window when it's raining, and then he's saying, of course, that's it, but we don't know what he's realized. And so there's more water, right? The rain. So apparently he's connected, or thinks he's connected, like what water could symbolize to people. But I mean, one writer was speculating maybe he didn't actually realize anything, or it's kind of left up to us whether or not the water means something, and if so, what.
Well, I would say that none of us really realizes anything anyway, and the fact that we say that we do is just a fallacy. The water, or rather, it that he is talking about, that he gets, is the it that we all get when we get it, right? But he finally got it. At the end of his life, he finally understands what exactly that is about the water. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm willing to wager it has something to do with life. Life and water. Life is water. Water is life. And it's like in that movie a long time ago where that guy starts talking about how he doesn't let people steal his water.
Which movie is this?
Well, I forget the name of the movie. It's an old black and white film. But there's this guy stopped making love to his wife because he didn't want her to steal his water when he came.
Okay.
She eventually drives him crazy. So he takes over the military base where he works. Can't seem to remember the name of the film.
Everybody rush out and see it.
But
what was that movie?
at the end of the film, there's this pilot on a bomber that's carrying a nuclear weapon, who having to launch the nuclear weapon because of this crazy guy who started this war with Russia, decides to ride it all the way down. And so the last scene is him riding this nuclear weapon down to its target while waving his hat, his
Dr.
cowboy hat.
Strangelove.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway,
Okay.
water.
Dr. Strangelove. Okay.
That's what I'm talking about. Water.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's the it that he was talking about. Life.
Life. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, he certainly goes through the book seeming to not kind of get how to get along with other people. Might be part of it. I mean, he doesn't edit himself. He just kind of says whatever comes into his head.
Yeah, there are no thought balloons here. Everything's just
true.
spoken. It's just, wow, he really said that. This is something that you should be thinking, but you're just saying it.
Yeah.
And other people are kind of ignoring him. So it seems like he's just thinking it, but no, all of this is spoken. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of nasty. But, you know, Wilson seems more than anything to be just confused by it all. It's like, what's the point of it? 43 years old when he starts the book, and he's like, oh, what the fuck is this? He doesn't get it. And I think at the end of his life, he does start to kind of come to terms with what his life has been. And I think the thing that kind of turns it around for him is realizing first he has a daughter, and then years later understanding that he has a granddaughter. And, well, you've got kids. How was that for you?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's certainly different from not having kids.
I suppose,
but yeah. I mean, you know, you feel more responsibility. I think when you have someone you feel you have to take care of.
Well, beyond the responsibility, though.
Feel more maturity.
Maybe maturity if you're trying to be responsible, but beyond the responsibility, I would say, and he was looking at in the book a kind of connectedness to the world. In fact, at one point in the book, he says, "There's going to be nothing left when I die, and no one's even going to remember me or my generation aside from a couple of things in a museum." Maybe. But then when he realizes he has a grandchild, it's like, I'm connected to the world again, and someone will actually remember me. Then he's kind of disappointed, or possibly disappointed, when he meets the grandchild on Skype, and he's like, I just want to play video games, so I have to talk to this guy? But his entire life is bittersweet like that, so it's kind of par for the course.
Yeah, but I mean, even after that Skype conversation, the next to last page, he's sounding kind of more empowered, talking to the guy in the coffee shop, and you know, seems to be seeing things more positively than he has through the rest of the book.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, I think Clowes is kind of leaving the specifics up to us.
Well, I think that's kind of important in this book. I mean, do you really want to get all the answers to everything that is?
Well, yeah. I mean, if Clowes has all the answers, he should tell us. But
I don't know.
Probably nobody does.
I don't know. I kind of like the fact that he skips around a lot, especially the bit about him suddenly being in jail or suddenly being with his ex-wife. About the ex-wife, in this, what happens to her?
Well, there was a page where it said that she had died of an overdose.
Yeah, that's what I thought it said. The film is different. She doesn't die of an overdose. It's actually much crueler.
Oh.
Well, crueler to Wilson, not cruel to what's her name?
Pippi.
Pee-Pee, that's it. I was going to call it Pepper. I think Pepper's the dog.
Here on,
Yeah,
on
so-
page 57.
So Wilson's in the movie. Wilson's in jail, and Pee-Pee comes in to see him and saying, it's been a couple of years, and I just wanted to say, I'm really sorry about testifying against you, but I had to do it because X, Y, and Z. And he's like, oh, but it's okay, and when I get out of here, we can get back together. She's like, well, actually, I found another guy, and I'm moving to Australia with him, and I just came to say goodbye. And he's just like, oh. And you just like see him crumble inside again. It was actually quite sad but funny. Funny. But it was completely different. I think Daniel Clowes fleshed out the character of Pippi much more for the film, and she wasn't fat as much. She was just old. I think she was played by Gwyneth Paltrow. But anyway, the character is a little bit more likable in the film than she is in the comic, just for the fact that she has more to do, says more, and doesn't seem to be teetering on the edge of death for the entire thing, but rather is trying to get her shit together, and eventually does and moves on. So, yeah, it's I guess much better than being a head in the box for a movie.
Coming up, Kumar and Emmet on the Wilson movie. Mulele and I also recorded a discussion about difficulties that writers sometimes face in collaborations with artists, and that conversation is now available at patreon.com/deconcomics for patrons only. You can access that and other patron-only audio, video, and photos by making a monthly donation of any amount. If you'd rather make a one-time donation, you can do so through PayPal. Send it to donate@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support.
I'm Batman.
And I'm Robin.
This is Tim.
And this is Paul.
To the Bat Polls! The iTunes reviews are in on To the Bat Polls podcast. These guys do a good job, writes Acello. Who knew that the Batman TV show was such a wellspring of insight into Hollywood trivia, 60s counterculture, sexual mores, and even musical analysis? The Young brothers know their stuff, says Professor Allen. It is a great mix of nostalgia, analysis, and fun. Highly recommended. You've heard the reviews, now try it for yourself. New episodes on the first, third, and fifth Thursdays of the month on iTunes or Stitcher, or at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com.
Batman, the answer to a policeman's prayer.
For nostalgia, analysis, and fun, it's
To the Bat Polls.
This is Kumar.
This is Emmet.
And, okay, I don't have to introduce the show.
You don't have to. You don't have to.
do it. Okay.
We can start right now.
Okay, we can start. Okay, we're in Melbourne. I'm going to say that. We're in the same room. Almost never happens
Absolutely. Yeah.
on this show, but it's happening this time. So what has happened is we have accidentally stepped on Tim's toes. So what happened is, as what normally happens is sometimes I plan an episode, like I'm going to talk about this book with this friend or something, and I don't really tell Tim about it until very late. And then just a few days ago, I said to him, because we've only planned to do this a few days ago, let's talk about the Wilson movie based on the Dan Clowes book. And I emailed this to Tim. I said, I'm going to talk about this with them. And he said, I'm already talking about Wilson with Mulele. Now, they're talking about the comic
Right.
5 years later for some reason.
Okay. Well, it's topical.
Yeah, it is topical. I don't know if they have access to the movie or what in Japan yet.
Yeah.
I don't even know if it's we saw a preview screening because somehow my wife got me tickets through the radio contest. I don't even know if it's in. Maybe it is in like indie cinema release.
It'll have a limited release in Art House Cinemas here in Melbourne.
Right. Okay.
This month. So yeah, there was a preview screening, and well, maybe they're reviewing Wilson because it's the year of Daniel Clowes, because we also had Patience out this year.
Yes, which I gave a kind of middling review to just a few months ago.
It's in the press again because it's nominated for an Eisner, I believe. So
okay, do you know what category?
I don't offhand. I just heard it in passing.
Interesting.
I heard
I'd
it was
like to
one
know.
Eisner nomination.
Right.
That was the main takeaway. I was like, oh, okay. I thought there'd be more. But you weren't a big fan. You were saying.
Yeah, it was kind of, and I feel kind of bad because I also wrote a review of Wilson for the website 5 years ago, and that was a pretty. I was also kind of a middling review. I think I said it was aiming for Ghost World and falling around Pussy level, the Dan Pussy comic, which was kind of a funny but inconsequential thing. And in some ways, the book still amazed me the way Dan Clowes books always do. Like, at first I was reading it, you read the first couple, so it's like a gag-a-day kind of format. Each page is a discrete unit. And you're reading one after the other, and it's about this misanthrope, because it's always about misanthrope with Dan Clowes, and it's like, I remember getting about to page 10, and like, oh, am I going to have to read 80 pages of this? Kind of getting exhausted. But then, as always happens with him, and this is the same with Ice Haven and Ghost World, where they were discrete units that seem disconnected, started to coagulate into something that had some power and was moving. At the end, I still kind of felt like, what was the point of it? And I still felt like it was empty, although it had its moments.
Yeah. That's an interesting point, because if you read his work, there's always these exercises in formalism. You realize, he's presenting these images in a certain way, he's been in the page in a certain way, and there's also this clear, heavy reliance on irony and sort of deadpan humor, and I think that has a certain appeal to people in the mainstream, particularly mainstream media, because I think it's equivalent to literary high art, but it's a comic book, so there's this sort of exotic quality to Daniel Clowes, and maybe that's why he's so appealing to filmmakers, because they think we're tapping into the best one. We're tapping into the best that comics can offer. But it just happens to be he's hit upon this really strange brew of irony and formalistic quirk.
Yes.
And that's what he does.
Yes. Yeah, and I think maybe Ghost World was the first, but then like Ice Haven and The Ray.
I was going to say The Ray, yeah.
Wilson, they all were kind of like, here's a little, almost a 4-panel strip like you'd see in a newspaper almost.
Yeah.
But then he just piles them on, and that's kind of how he gets at the character through that. And it allowed some tricks. And Wilson's interesting too, because they're in kind of different art styles like Ice Haven was. Like some of them are they look like Casper the Friendly Ghost comics. Some of them are in his more traditional realistic style.
Yeah.
So it's kind of all over the map that way too. And I found reading it was like you almost start to ignore the art. Like, what's the relationship between? It doesn't matter whether he's drawing it in the Casper style or in his Ghost World style. The content, the verbal content, is the same. And I had trouble parsing. Is it having a different emotional effect on me if he draws it like a peanut strip or if he draws it like this?
It comes back to the sense of a voice, that he has a very particular voice in how he tells his stories. And you tap into that quite quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a shorthand, especially in Wilson, in the comic. I felt like the art almost became inconsequential. I don't want to say inconsequential, maybe less.
Yeah, it's background detail.
Yeah, you're absorbing the information in another way. So it's almost like a delivery device. It's like those carts that go through the mines that are just carrying the rubble
and it's
through.
this sense of a character, really, that you're picking up on. It's this sense of an individual, and that individual's voice, which you happen to associate with Clowes. So there's a continuity there. Every time you read a Clowes book, you're rejoining that sort of point of view, if you like.
Right.
And what's interesting about the film is that we have actors vocalizing Clowes and personifying Clowes' characters in a way which I think it's a remove from the book.
Oh, yeah.
And then it's interesting because, I'll give you an example. If I read To Kill a Mockingbird, I hear the voice of Atticus Finch.
Yes.
I hear Gregory Peck.
Yeah.
You know, the two are interchangeable for me, right? Even though they're two separate entities. Whereas with Wilson, the character Wilson is Woody Harrelson to me in the movie.
Yeah.
This is Woody Harrelson. And Woody Harrelson actually makes Wilson more palatable to me because I have associations with Woody Harrelson. Woody Harrelson, be he the sort of foolish character from Cheers, or he's the sort of basketball shark from White Men Don't Jump.
Or True Detective.
True Detective, where himself, Matthew McConaughey have this back and forth between them. And of course, Haymitch from The Hunger Games, where again, he was very affecting in that role. Woody Harrelson has this career that I'm very familiar with. So when he plays this absolute jerk, I am willing to give him some credit. But it is Woody Harrelson. I want to see where this is going. Well, I don't know if necessarily a person picking up the comic would have that same relationship to the character. They like, say they're coming in cold and start reading with this guy, and then I go, this guy's just awful. I don't want to spend any more time with him. You know. Whereas with the movie, you've got a celebrity actor. There's an association there.
I agree completely. I think in the book it was very. He's kind of one-dimensional. He's maybe we should say two-dimensional. He says, "I love people," and every gag is almost the same. It starts with "How you doing, old timer?" in panel 1. In panel 6, he's saying, "This is a box full of shit," or he's saying, "Go screw yourself" or something. Like there's always that panel 1 to 6 transformation, and he seems like he's a really positive guy, and he's like, I think people are great, or we should get to know our elders, and he says stuff, but he never acts that way.
Right.
And in the movie, there's a scene exactly like that where he's on the bus, and he say that voiceover says something like, "I believe everybody has a story to tell," and this homeless guy comes up and asks him for change or something, and he brushes him off and says, "Get out of here," or whatever.
Yeah.
But in the book, it's 80 pages of that, and when we go through the plot where he reconnects with his wife and his daughter, you're not really sure how he really feels about them because of all that's come before and all that comes after, in fact. But in the movie, when he reconnects with his wife, Pippi, who's played by Laura Dern,
she's amazing.
I believe that he loved her 100%.
Yes.
And his daughter, he's so genuinely. It's not like he says things like Pippi points out, you want to have an Insta family, like you just want to you just want to skip, directly to the end and have everything all at once. And yes, that is true, but I do believe that the way he acts, he genuinely loves her.
Yeah.
That girl that he's seen her from the car initially, right there, stalking her. And I think that's him as an actor. I think it's all the actors. I do wonder if part of it is, and this is going to sound totally shallow, but everybody in the movie is really good looking.
Yeah.
Like Laura Dern looks amazing.
Judy Greer
is like so smoking hot in this movie. And in the book, everybody's kind of dowdy looking and they're all hunched over.
Yeah.
And only Woody Harrelson and there's some moments where I felt like he was studying there in the books because his posture was he was hunched over and just looked amazing. It was like looking at the comic on screen. But everybody else, really, and Cheryl Hines plays Pippi's sister, and she's another woman who's like 50-something probably, and just looks amazing.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that kind of plays into your sympathy, like if it's a Hollywood kind of thing.
Yeah.
Despite it being really a small indie movie, that there's that kind of gravity too.
It's stacked with some quality actors. They know how they understand how to work the camera.
Yeah.
They understand how to engage with the audience emotionally. And even Woody Harrelson, when he's playing Wilson, and when he does these little misanthrope games on people where he deliberately provokes people, we are invited in on the joke. There's this sense that this guy is an absolute jerk, but also we are entertained by him being in it, and that's a fine line because again, you could quite easily have an actor playing somebody who's a monster.
Do you think he's deliberately goading these people, or do you think? Because my feeling was he enters the scene and he sits down. Like there's the scene in the toilet, the urinals, He goes
That's
into the urinal.
amazing.
So there's a guy. They go to this
Okay.
amusement park. There's one guy at one end. He comes in. He's about to go to stall number 1 instead of stall number 6. He sees the other guy. And he walks right over to the urinal number 5.
Urinal at the wall. Yeah.
And they pee together. He has a conversation with his daughters, and then he looks down and sounds to me totally genuine. Says, "Hey, by the way," gives him a fist bump on the shoulder. "Nice cock."
Yeah.
And then walks away.
Very nice penis. Yeah. Now the thing about that is, everything he does in this film when he's interacting with strangers is, to me, performative. He's playing a part. Like, he actually is looking for a reaction. So let's take that example. He stands beside the gentleman at the urinal. He stands right beside him. So deliberately making him uncomfortable. Like, deliberately. And then he starts having this really intimate conversation with him about his daughter and his family, who he's just met, by the way. And the daughter is played by Isabella Amara, and Claire is the name of the daughter. So he's talking about Claire, and he's talking about Laura Dern, his ex, and he does that because in every other instance where we've seen him do this, when he launches into some speech to somebody, to a stranger, they go, "Oh, can you leave me alone, please?" Or they put their earphones in, or they try to move away.
Yeah.
And he does that deliberately because he enjoys that. He enjoys proving his point. His point is nobody talks anymore. Nobody wants to have a genuine social interaction. So he's being perverse in forcing a genuine social interaction on people. So this he's got his penis in his hands, he's at a urinal. This guy starts talking about his family, and instead of being uncomfortable, he is uncomfortable, but not as uncomfortable as the other people we've met. He actually turns out, "Oh, well, that's what being a father is all about. You've got to be there for them." And they actually have this really interesting back and forth. And the situation has not resulted in the outcome that Wilson wanted. So, at the very end, he turns to him and says, "By the way, nice penis." And then the scene ends. And of course, that is about he couldn't let it go. He had to put the guy off somehow. I'm sure he, as you said, he genuinely loves his ex. I'm sure he genuinely was impressed by the size of the man's penis. But at the same time, it was all about making him feel uncomfortable. And it's funny.
I hear what you're saying, but the voiceover is speaking to himself or us, and it sounds like, I feel like there's a social maladjustment. Like he doesn't know about boundaries. You're saying he's deliberately crossing those boundaries.
He's aware of the boundary, and he thinks they're false. He's
right. Okay, I see what you're saying. Because
he's kind of like Catcher in the Rye, when he's always talking about phonies.
Right.
So everybody's a phony.
Yeah.
Of course, that excuses him of actually examining his own flaws and what he's done wrong. So Wilson's very similar. It's all about projection. He's trying to make, and again, I bring this back to Woody Harrelson's performance. And how he invites us to laugh at these people, all the while playing this character who's a mess of a human being, like an absolute disaster. And that's the source of the comedy within the film, that he's having these encounters with all these people, and then he creates this family unit with his ex and the daughter that his ex gave up for adoption. And he's doing all these things supposedly to reconnect with family, but why is he doing all these things? He's triggering some sort of escalation. He's triggering some sort of, let's just see where this goes. Let's see where this ride takes me. That's how I read it.
Yes. Well, he's a little bit triggered by the death of his father.
Yeah.
Which is, in any other Hollywood screenplay, quote unquote, would be the triggering incident or whatever.
Which gives him no emotional catharsis whatsoever. Like, he returns to his father's deathbed and there's nothing there for him.
Well, there's a very interesting comparison with the book in that case. So the page that's followed by the scene in a park where he used to go with his father. In the comic, he falls down on the ground and cries, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy."
Yeah.
And in the movie, he goes to a park. There's some other kids there. He makes the nanny of the kids uncomfortable.
Again.
He curses like crazy in front of the kids, and but he's trying to talk about how great kids are, and all this kind of stuff. Okay, she runs off with the kids, and he has a little bit of a tearful moment. There, and he does try to get something out of his father. He's Mom died suddenly. We have a chance. Give me something.
Absolutely.
Of course, his father's comatose.
Give me catharsis now. Give me the end of this story. But there is no end to the story. I mean, those things are fake.
Yes.
So there's no lives don't have second acts or whatever the line is from Fitzgerald. Scott Fitzgerald, isn't it?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So he is staging all these encounters with people to call attention to in a story or in a movie. This would lead to a series of adventures. But life's not like this. And then he actually gets wrapped up in an adventure.
Right.
Which he seems to be consciously staging. I really credit to Daniel Clowes actually as a screenwriter.
Yeah.
Because that's interesting.
Yes.
This isn't somebody else working with his comic.
That's
this is
super
him
interesting.
restaging his own comic.
Well,
as
and
a film.
In a sense, contradicting himself, purposely contradicting himself, because I feel at the end of the book it's still quite negative. So there's a scene where he gets on Skype with his grandson now, and he's unable to connect with the grandson. He holds up a Thomas the Tank Engine toy for the kid to look at. The kid's not interested in the grandfather. Here we've got a much younger, a baby, and it's the Skype scene is like a joyful moment. It's not like, oh no, he's still alone. It's, and I feel like every scene Clowes as a screenwriter has gone deeper into the character and actually gotten something besides that relentless pessimism out of it. Like and I think Laura Dern's a big part of that too. The way she comes across, she's like the human being that's kind of tethering him.
And the daughter, Isabella.
Yeah, for sure.
She's really good. The scenes they have together, I'm not wanting to spoil anything, but particularly towards the end of the movie, the scenes they have together are very rich in terms of what she's giving on screen.
Yes.
And Harrelson, again, he's a very good ensemble actor at times.
Yeah.
So he's a very good companion to another actor. So between the two of them, there's just great back and forth.
I do think, but it's similar. It struck me as similar to Ghost World, which I don't think Dan Clowes wrote.
I don't.
But
I want to say Terry Zwigoff also wrote it. But
right.
I'm not sure.
But again, the comics are in both cases are very disparate. They're kind of all over the map.
Yeah.
And then suddenly at the end there's a kind of satisfying conclusion out of nowhere. Like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
In the movies there's more of a coherent through line, which leads to the satisfying conclusion. But I feel like both of them are more positive, or more hopeful, optimistic, when you get to the end of the road. But that leads me to another question, which is, I do love, there's a very rare, I don't know if we should call it a genre of movie, I'm thinking of Funny People and Young Adult, where a person goes through a series of incidents through the movie where normally they would learn from that and become a better person.
Sure.
But in both those movies, at the end, they're the same person they were at the beginning. They learn nothing from it.
Yes.
And do you think the Wilson movie or book, I think in the book he's definitely the same guy that he was at the beginning, despite the death of his father and meeting and the jail time and all that. In the movie, do you think he's the same guy at the end of it?
I do. I absolutely think he's the same guy at the end of it, but I think what the movie says is that the other characters made him a part of their life.
Right.
So he was looking for a connection as well. That's part of his whole thing. And because he's such a jerk, he can't connect. The scene where he revisits the home of an old friend who is just...
he's worse.
He's worse than him.
Yeah.
And then he just, like... Instead of, again, in another movie, there would have been an attempt, I need to make this work. This is the only person in life I have a connection with. He just, actually, you're a complete asshole. I have to leave.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
Like, that's that story thread gone. So at the end of the movie, the characters we've met through Wilson have decided to continue to allow him to be part of their lives.
Yes.
So they've changed.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And I want to also make the point that... the director of this film, Craig Johnson, he also made a movie with Kristen Wiig and Bill Hader called The Skeleton Twins a few years ago, which was very, I think it was highly praised in certain circles. It was an independent movie about siblings who go through a family tragedy and then bond over the course of the movie, and there's all sorts of back and forth there too. And I thought it was... manipulative and quite cold, and it missed the mark, but it was celebrated for a lot of people because they thought it was quite earnest. They thought it was quite earnest and honest and all the rest of it. And I just didn't work with me. But there's a scene in it. There's one scene in it where Bill Hader and Kristen Wiig reenact. They do karaoke session.
Okay.
And they do Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now.
Okay.
And they do this whole scene where they're dancing around their living room together, like they used to when they were teenagers. And that scene works. That's a great bloody scene.
Okay.
And I feel as if whatever emotional connection Johnson established in that scene, he managed to establish throughout this entire movie. Mm-hmm. Because there's such a warmth to it. Mm. Despite the fact, again, I keep going back to it, the guy's a jerk. Right? But you like him.
Yeah.
You know? And there's something clicks when you're watching the movie. Something clicks and you go, oh, that's the level we're at with this movie. It's sort of a black comedy with a gentle undertone to it.
I think the part of what works beyond Woody Harrelson's performance on the page is that he says what we all believe.
Sure.
Not in the sense of like Michael Douglas and falling down. I mean, like when he sits down next to a guy.
That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, he sits down next to a guy on the train and he says, "What's your line? What's your job?" He's bothering this guy. The guy says, "I'm an IT manager." It was a little bit more obscure than that. I can't remember what his answer was, and Wilson goes off on him. He's like, "Oh, I'm a IPC PDU," and he says, "What? Tell me what you do. What do you do in your day?" And the guy says, he says, "I fill out reports and I send these emails," and Wilson just loses it. He's like, that's not a job. You're not living. You're supporting the oligarchy. That's all you're up to. And I mean, every word he says is true. And when he talks about how we need to connect with people, every single thing in the voiceover is true. And often what he says to people is totally. There's a scene where he's with his nephew at the table, and nephew looks at Claire and is like, "So she's my cousin?" And he's like, "Yes, Watson, you figured it out." Like, But
again, part of that is antagonism because the nephew is going to go to a good college and he's got his life laid out for him. So this is about Wilson immediately attacking him for the privilege he enjoys.
Right.
Whereas Claire, are you going to college? He goes, "Fuck no!" She's, and then Wilson's like, "Oh, she's like me," because basically we're losers. You know, life is not laid out for us. We're actually going to have a really tough time.
Right.
Might as well just say fuck. And there's a whole scene where they're all in the car together. This impromptu family are all in the car together, and they just say fuck. Just say fuck. Which is great. And again, there's a sense of excitement on the part of the audience. In that, we recognize that moment. Fuck it. Like, why are we worrying about our jobs? Why are we worrying about the future? Let's just ride this train and see where it goes. And in terms of that, the film articulates that sense really, really well. Like that, just the sense of let's just push on. Let's just see where this takes us.
Yes. Well, he's the one pushing.
Yes.
And Pippi's the one that's kind of resisting. Like, she's always trying to stay away.
She stays along.
She does come along. She does. He convinces her, and they have this history.
Weekly protesting. "Oh, Wilson, I don't know if we should be stalking our daughter that we gave up." But then she's still there.
Yes.
So exactly. She feels like she's part of his story.
Yes.
And then, again, I don't want to spoil anything, but like, Laura Dern's amazing in this.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Did you hear, have you been following the new Twin Peaks?
No, not yet.
She has appeared in Twin Peaks as Diane.
Interesting.
So there was a Diane.
Okay. I've been...
All along, there's Laura Dern.
There is a Diane. Interesting. Okay.
It's there is something almost Lynchian about this as well.
I'll tell you, because I actually did not recognize her for the first half of the movie.
Yeah.
I was like, that looks like Laura Dern, but that's not Laura Dern. And then I was kind of not convinced for the first half, and then it finally sunk in. Oh, it really is her.
But the point I'm making is the film has this ordinariness to it. But there's something very strange happening.
Yes.
Which I think, and Lynch likes to populate these very mundane worlds with extreme characters, and Wilson is a very extreme character.
Yeah, when he does the puppy dog voice for people, that is very Lynchian.
Yes.
Because he just goes around doing it in public to people. When people talk to his dog, he talks back in this puppy voice.
And you're breaking the social contract in a way, because you're not supposed to be so offensive to people, like straight off the bat.
Well, he's constantly... Yeah.
Do you know who he reminds me of, actually? Particularly the scene you mentioned before with the homeless person on the train. There's a scene in Eric Powell's The Goon, where the Goon, who's this, for those who don't know, is this gangster who pretends to be the lieutenant of a mob boss, and he's got a little friend called Frankie who follows him along with a trusty knife. His catchphrase is stabbing the eye. And the town the goon patrols is overwhelmed by zombies and vampires and all sorts of supernatural creatures, and it's some sort of 1930s noirish location. So the goon has an encounter with a crazy person who starts screaming at him, and then he just yells right back at him, and then the guy's puzzled by it, and he turns around to Frankie and he says, making fun of these people is one of life's purest joys. And again, like an awful thing to do.
Yeah.
Like to somebody, again, we've got this whole sense that you're not supposed to be that awful to people, but there's this sort of visceral, yes, that Powell in particular in his comics taps into. All of the goon is about doing the things you're not supposed to do and saying the things you're not supposed to say. And Wilson has the same project. He will do and say the things no one else has the guts to do or say. And as far as making that interesting in a cinematic way, I think the film does a very good job of that. It sort of elevates what could have been a bit of a dirge into a very recognizable story.
I think it's literally done that, because I think the comic is kind of a dirge.
Right, yeah.
And I think that everything is richer and humanized in the movie in a way that the comic was really an unbelievable character. Like, I've never met anyone like that, even though he appears in every Dan Clowes book in some form or other. I have not met that person. Maybe I've just been lucky to have not met that person in my life, but the movie version was a much more believable guy for me. And everybody else around it just made it. Even the scene with the private detective that locates the daughter, went way further in the movie than it did in the book, where it's just kind of a throwaway thing. But even that is like even that character prints out a picture of her and looks at the picture and says, "Oh, she could lose a few pounds before he hands it over." That kind of thing, and it's like he's like in a dingy office. It made more sense than what you see in the comic. And there's some great additions in the movie too. Like there's this, after the father dies, he's like, I need to get a girlfriend, or I need to move on with my life. And he goes to the pet store and he meets this woman, and his way of meeting her is to crash his car into her deliberately, which is not in the book.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, is there anything else we wanted to add? Because I did promise Tim I'd keep it under half an hour, so this episode wouldn't be 3 hours long.
Yeah, no, just in terms of a film review, this is 94 minutes of your day.
Yeah.
That's tight.
Yeah.
Like, most comic book adaptations now with people flying around in capes, that'll be 2 to 3 hours of your life.
Yeah.
Right, this is 94 minutes, an hour and a half, in, you're out. And you will actually get something from it that I feel is very emotionally resonant.
Yes.
So, in terms of, if I want to give this movie a review, 2 thumbs up. I think it's a great film.
Yeah.
And it's also a great adaptation in terms of it lifts the material, as you were saying.
Yeah, I agree. Everything completely, and I also think it's very interesting in comparison to the book, and knowing that the same person was responsible for both, because he had to be in a completely different mindset to create a different character out of it.
I'd be really interested to see an original screenplay by Daniel Clowes. Like one.
I think Art School Confidential was kind of it.
Oh, right, okay.
And it wasn't great.
Yeah, okay.
As a movie.
But that was him and Zwigoff again, wasn't it?
Yeah, I want to say yes.
I think it was, because of that, maybe there was the process of collaboration just wasn't fruitful for him.
Yeah.
It's like Frank Miller doing Sin City with Robert Rodriguez, and then I'm a director now.
Right. Yeah,
He's the Saint or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Although there's the opposite extreme, because Sin City was actually pretty good. I think he genuinely has the knack. There is something about this screenplay which I think is very judicious, and how it goes through the plot and how all the scenes are broken down, The different character beats are great.
Oh, there is one other thing I wanted to
Yep.
talk about.
Go for it.
Last thing.
Sure.
The icicle. Okay, so
Yes.
5 years ago I read this comic.
Yes.
There's a scene where Wilson is in jail.
Yep.
He watches an icicle melt and he says something like, "Don't see it."
Yeah.
End of strip. 6 panels of him looking at this thing and he's like, "I don't get it," and walks away.
Yeah.
End of the book, there's a page where he's looking at the rain out the window. 6 panels, finally says, "I get it now."
Right.
The end.
Yep.
Okay, 5 years ago, I wrote a review of this book for our website, and I was like, there's a scene here with an icicle which doesn't make sense, but when you get to the end, it's actually quite profound and moving.
Yeah.
This time, when I read it 2 nights ago, I was like, what did I mean by that? Because I don't get it. I don't get the connection now. I've forgotten what the
You
connection
felt
was.
compelled to make a connection there, maybe.
I don't know. There's a scene earlier in the comic where he says something about how my parents used to watch the ocean and maybe they connected with something out there. I don't get it. So it might be some sort of water thing. There's a scene in the movie where he's in the jail and he's looking at an icicle and there's a fast forward through day and night and seasons and you see the icicles get smaller. There's no other connection to that scene. So this is a scene which has no connective tissue.
But it's clearly a very contained scene.
It is, but I'm just wondering what people are going to make of it.
It was ambiguous. That's true. But I found it very moving in a way because it's him in this jail.
Yeah.
Like the other prisoner walks up to him and says, "What are you doing, Wilson?"
Yeah.
You know, whatever. And he's like, "I'm watching this." You know.
Yeah.
And like, we're led to believe this is how he's spent his days.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Like he's watching life go past. You know. And there's something quite.
You're right. You're totally right.
You know, there's something quite interesting about that and quite sad.
Yeah.
And then he has to reconnect with his life again after that. Which, so he's sort of frozen for a time. If you want to really abuse the metaphor, he's been frozen for a time and then he will be let out into the world again and have to reconnect.
You're exactly right. I should have thought about it longer.
Wilson, the movie, is out now in many countries. As far as I can tell, it's still not out here in Japan. Don't forget, if you support us on Patreon, you can get my conversation with Mulele about comics collaboration difficulties, as well as videos from TCAF, extra questions I asked in some past interviews, and more. Patreon.com/DeconComics. We'd love to hear from you. Write us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com or look us up on Patreon, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. All our social media links can be found on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. Also, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Our theme is from bensound.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. The most recent episode is right behind this one in the podcast feed. This coming Thursday on To the Bat Poles, Kumar joins Paul and me to talk about the Batman manga that came out here in Japan in 1966. It was inspired by the TV show starring Adam West, but how much does it actually resemble the show? Look up To the Bat Poles wherever you find your podcasts or at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com. Next week on this show, Coom interviews Ethan Riley, creator of the series Pope Hats. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.